This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 270.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramzi Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramzi Majaba, and I have a good friend on the show by the name of John Hodgson. He's been on the show in the past. A link to his episode is in the show notes. He's a recruiter. He works with companies that want to recruit sales engineers. Maybe I should move these for those watching on YouTube. So he's a recruiter. He works out of Portugal, but he's English, and he helps recruit SEs for large organizations. And we discussed many topics, including why is the interview process so long and what can we be done about it. But he brought up a great topic, which is like the quality of hire, measuring it. How do you measure the quality of hire? Because a lot of people hire, some work, some don't. A lot of people do interviews, some have good judgment about the potential SE, some don't. So how do they measure all that? And so John and I discussed that at length, and we talk about many different topics, but let's just jump into the show and listen to what John has to say. I will see you after. Mr. Hodgson, welcome back.
Mr. Majaba, great to be back. How are you?
I'm happy now you said my name correctly, which is hard for some people. I don't know why. But I appreciate that. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's springtime, best time of year, so things are good.
It's allergy time of year, it seems, at least for me here in Canada. John, we've talked a bunch of times, and you've been on the show before, and I'll leave a link to that show in the show notes. But for those who don't know you, can you give a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. So my name is John Hodgson. I am the owner of a pre-sales specialist recruiting firm called Bright Dynamics. And so we recruit mainly in the enterprise SaaS segment. We work with some big kind of tier one vendors, and then a number of kind of best of breed SaaS native startups. And most of our work is recruiting at kind of senior individual contributor level, manager level, leadership level. And then we are about to, so we've taken some time to develop a pre-sales specific competency model and set of pre-sales specific assessments for candidate assessment, which we've built together with a company called Sova, which we will be launching shortly. So that will help hiring teams to be able to assess candidates with a bit more robustness, let's say.
Okay, cool. Sales engineering or pre-sales is not really well known. I'm curious how you find yourself recruiting specifically. I don't know if I asked you that question before, but how did you get into this domain where you're recruiting specifically pre-sales people?
Sure. So when I started the company, so that was 8 years ago, initially it was around all go-to-market roles, so lots of direct sales, pre-sales, some consulting in there as well. And in the first year, I got really lucky with a couple of excellent pre-sales leaders. And I really enjoyed working on those positions. I felt a really good connection with both the hiring managers and also with candidates. And I just realized that they were the positions that I enjoyed working on the most. And it got to a point where I just thought, well, if I can only work on a limited amount of positions, why not be those that I enjoy most and also, to be honest, were most successful as well. And then from a business perspective, if you specialize in one area, you're able to build up a bigger network. That brings value to customers. You develop a more acute kind of understanding of what good looks like in terms of pre-sales, and all of that leads on to an increased ability to get positions filled with quality candidates.
Why did you enjoy that specifically?
Enjoy working with pre-sales?
Yeah, I mean, you had so many options. What made you enjoy? What's so special about us?
So I think people in pre-sales have got that really nice combination of everybody, you've all got an area of expertise, you've got some substance, and there's the kind of the dynamism and the drive and the get stuff done that you get from the sales side.
Yep.
but at the same time with that kind of substance there, if that makes sense. And I think that there's people in pre-sales want to do a good job for the customer, and kind of enjoy their role as well. And so I think just from a personality perspective, it just seems to click.
Okay. And you mentioned that you worked on like an assessment model. I mean,
Yeah.
what can you share about that? Like, what's the purpose of the it's so hard to assess people when you're talking to them in person.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? What's the benefit of that?
So the benefit is, in terms of assessment, like you say, it's really hard, it's really complex. And we believe the best way to assess is to have a number of different approaches and bring all of that kind of data together and then make a decision from there. And so the assessment itself, so they're psychometric assessments, they look at personality and they link through to 12 specific competencies. And so what they serve to do is they ask individuals a bunch of questions around customer centricity or resilience and around different areas. And I think there's consensus that they're not predictive enough just to be the answer. They're not the kind of panacea that gives you the secret sauce into understanding an individual, but they do bring up interesting things. So for example, like sales acumen may come up not as strong as you expected. And so then when a hiring manager goes into the interview process, they can focus that bit more attention around sales acumen to see whether there's an issue there or not, if that makes sense. So the idea is they provide hiring managers with some science-based kind of insights for them to then use as a guide for the interview, as opposed to replacing the interview itself.
And that's not out yet, from if I understand.
No, so this is to be launched very shortly.
Okay, so this episode will be out in a couple of weeks from the day of recording. So if it's out before then, let me know and I'll put that in the show notes. And one of the things that you've worked on is a hiring survey.
Correct.
Why?
So it links through to so I've always been really interested in the assessment side of things. And so it links through to that in terms of we wanted to really understand from a hiring manager's perspective what they think good looks like in pre-sales, what kind of competencies, which job components, what they think an ideal candidate looks like, and also to understand how they go about assessing those characteristics. And so we thought the best way to do this would be through a survey. So we surveyed 103 leaders, and that way we get a real picture as to kind of what's going on out there in reality, rather than just thinking about things from like a theoretical perspective. And I think that in terms of the value, ultimately, if you're a pre-sales leader or manager, understanding how your peers think in terms of what good looks like, how they go about assessing, how they assess their own assessment process, if that makes sense. I think it's interesting reading, because you can see how other people, how other leaders operate, and then from a kind of like an individual contributor or a candidate's perspective, it's quite valuable because it gives you good insight into what pre-sales managers are looking for. So if you're going through an interview process, it gives you a clear idea in terms of what's important. To give you an example, the highest rated job component of the 10 was working with account executives, so working effectively with account executives. And we expected that to be in the top 3, but probably about third. So if you're a candidate going into an interview process, it's really important to understand, obviously, that's something that's going to be top of mind for a hiring manager.
Right. I mean, you brought up a bunch of questions that, like, what does an ideal candidate look like? What pre-sales managers look for? But before I ask those questions back to you, is there something that you weren't expecting, a result that you were not expecting in terms of one specific account SE manager thinks about, or maybe as a group they think about?
Yeah. So looking at it, I suppose as a whole, what surprised us most, I think that the picture that we got in terms of what good looks like for an SE didn't surprise us. So I'm doing the opposite of answering your question. So things like, the competencies, building trust was top, curiosity was second, collaboration was third. I think we'd expect those kind of results. We didn't expect working with account executives to be so important in the minds of hiring managers. And And then, for example, things like evangelism, one-to-many activities, kind of social media presence, that sort of thing, actually didn't rate as high as we'd expected. So I think that managers potentially are a bit more pragmatic when it comes to when they're actually, making a hiring decision. And then I think that the biggest surprise for me was more around the level of it seems that the level of attention that's being placed on the assessment process itself. So it seems like the industry has kind of converged around a model where you have like a hiring manager interview, and then potentially somebody more senior will interview, a panel, and you make a decision. And nobody's kind of questioning that. And so, for example, 73% of hiring teams don't measure quality of hire, and that to me was a surprise. So that's to say, imagine if it's not the best analogy, but if you have a factory and the output of the quality of what comes out is obviously important. You might measure cost per unit or the speed of production, that sort of thing, but you're obviously going to want to be measuring the quality of hire as well. Because if you don't measure that, then there's no way of knowing where your blind spots are. There's no way of improving. There's no way of knowing kind of how effectively you're doing what you're kind of setting out to do. And at the moment, based on the results, 73% don't do that.
Okay. I think I realized one thing, that I don't know how to write measure. The second thing is, can you define quality of measure for me? I know, like you mentioned the analogy about the chocolate factory, but in like hiring any employee, how do you think of like quality of measure, quality of hire?
Sure. Okay. So the simple way is a binary: good hire, bad hire, great hire. You can rate the overall hire. Okay. The quality of hire is effectively how did the person perform versus your expectations. Okay. But more specifically, there's a way of doing it in more depth, which is to say, okay, so we've set out, these are the top 3, top 5 competencies, components, whatever you want to say, that we believe will lead to success in the role. And then at the point of hire, if every individual that's been involved in the hiring process then rates across those different job components, you've got a view of what your idea of how the person will perform across the different levels, and also across the different hiring managers or the different interviewers. And then if at 6 months you go back and you rate the same competencies, and at 12 months you go back and rate the same competencies, and you do that over 10, 20 hires, you can then go back and say, okay, so what we thought on average the people was this at the point of hire. But it could be that we were very effective at assessing how well somebody is able to demo or present, for example, but we haven't been that great at assessing resilience or kind of level of accountability and that sort of thing. And that then means that you can so you're looking at the quality of the individual, but you're also looking at the quality of your assessment process itself, and you're also doing that across the different people that are interviewing as well. So you'll find that there's areas where assessment, where you're able to predict what performance will be like, and there are areas where you're able to do that less so, and so you can concentrate there. And then you'll also have, you might have a sales head, for example, and it turns out that person isn't that great at predicting how the person will perform across these different competencies, but you may have one person that is able to predict with a lot of accuracy, and then that person obviously can be more involved afterwards in assessment design, mentoring, interview training, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Have I explained that okay?
Yeah, that I understand all that. So what are some of the competencies that you recommend hiring manager look at? Well, at least, or what are the competencies that the hiring managers have looked at? Is there anything you would do differently?
I think generally speaking, leaders, managers, hiring managers have a pretty good idea as to what leads to success. Okay. It's interesting. So we've had a bunch of conversations alongside the survey where we've talked to we've had 13 conversations with different hiring managers, and all of them we ask, what do you think leads to success in pre-sales? And everyone says different things. So some people might say it's customer centricity, others will say it's like somebody with an innate desire to learn, sales acumen, different things come up. But I think that all of them, I think that the pre-sales role is so varied that you can have different types of individual that have different strengths, and it can work. And also in different contexts as well. So if you're going to run a couple of big, huge accounts, that's going to be different to if you're working with, fast paced through lots of different roles. So I think that the competencies will vary. We have, along in terms of communication, we've got creative communicator, sales acumen, business value focused, and then in terms of drive and mindset, we have driven and motivated, thirst for learning, positive emotionality, so being kind of positive natured, building trust, customer centricity, guided by innovation, and then the final three are collaborating account teams, building valuable networks, so networks within the organization, within the account teams and the wider organization, and then having hard conversations. So that's the kind of the menu of the 12 competencies that we've based our assessment on. Some will be important for some situations and some will be important for others.
So I'm going to push back a little bit. I agree with all these, that these are things that we should measure. The problem that I've seen with many companies is that there is no way to objectively measure them. For example, I was hired, I'm a remote SE. My manager had no idea what I was doing and what I wasn't doing. So how with the managers that you've worked with, how would they be able to measure all that? Is it self-tracking or is it somebody else doing it?
So there's definitely, I think that question goes to the heart of the difficulty of hiring, and so in terms of how they can be measured, there's lots of different ways, and I think again using lots of different ways is good. So you can look at achievement patterns. So that's not actually necessarily looking at the competencies, that's more saying, if somebody has a background of being promoted, working on bigger deals, winning awards and so on, normally the past can predict the future, but not always. So kind of doing a bit of detective work to really understand how somebody has had an impact and how they've added value and how they've, really differentiated themselves versus others. That's one way. The classic kind of HR-y way is more through, competency-based interviews. So, if you're looking at, I don't know, discovery, it might be, what do you think is important to be successful in discovery? And then to ask, can you give me an example of a time when you've done that? And then to go into more depth. And personally, I think that has a place, but it has some limitations in terms of competency-based questions, because people can tell a good story, but doing it is sometimes different than telling the story. And then the other is like job samples, for example. So, going back to the demo stage, I think that's a pretty good way of seeing how people can communicate to an audience, how people can hold an audience, how people deal with pressure and that sort of thing. So I think like using a combination of it together and then bringing that in, and then there has to be that kind of human ability to kind of pass all of that and then come to an overall score. But it's not, it's by no means an exact science.
All this sounds like these things that we're going to do before we hire someone. The question then, how do we track it if they're maintaining that after they hire in 6 months?
So I think it needs to boil down to ratings, which aren't ideal. So, but I think generally speaking, I think if I were to ask you to rate somebody from your organization you've worked closely with across different job components, I think you could give a decent rating. Would you not say?
Yeah. Well, so the thought that popped in my head here is throughout the hiring process, I've interviewed with many companies, and some of the companies that I've interviewed with, there's a hiring manager that I continue to work with, and then there's 2 or 3 SEs that I interview with. And then there's some salesperson, could be my potential salesperson or some salesperson. Then there's a VP and all that. But there's no continuity after. Like the SEs that I interviewed with are not necessarily the people who are going to mentor me when I get the job. Right. So, but if they were to be my mentors, they could be that continuity. And if there are certain, as mentors, they have certain tasks that they need to make sure that the SE is doing. then they can communicate that and have goals together. Now we can have a better track, and the SE knows what they're supposed to be doing as well during the first month. I don't know. That's just what popped in my head right now.
No, and listen, I think and I think actually in a way that helps the tracking afterwards, because you're not biased by your own initial, you're not subject to confirmation bias. So if you have a couple of SEs on the interview panel who will then rate you again across different job components, across different competencies, and then you have a different set of SEs that you work with who will rate you based on seeing you in action, and you can then contrast the reality of Ramsey 6 months in, 12 months in, versus what the assessment was at the point of hire. And then you can go back and say, actually, that second SE that interviewed Ramsey nailed it. That person understood Ramsey's strengths and weaknesses very well. And if that person is continuously doing that, then however that individual is doing it, the results are kind of speaking for themselves. So it's not an exact science in the sense that it's not measurables like quota achievement and that sort of thing. But I think that people have got a pretty good idea as to how people are performing.
That's the funny part. When I first became an SE, my performance review was based around hitting quota or not hitting quota.
Yeah.
And my first year I hit quota and I felt amazing. Mm-hmm. And a year later I found out that I sucked at it and people bought despite of me, not because of me. So hitting quota is not such a good measurement of good sales engineering. Or a bad one. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and ironically, sometimes it can mask the need to improve as well. So we've had, the last year has been a tough year on the recruiting side, and I think we've improved a lot on a lot of things in certain areas. And so I think actually when you're not hitting quota, sometimes it can be a result of yourself, it can be a result of the outside world. It's normally a combination of the two, but those are the when things are going well, it's
you have no reason to look internally and see what's going on if things are going well, right? Like high tides float all boats. Everybody's genius during a bull market.
Yeah.
But it's you can tell who's a genius during the bear market.
100%.
So
and the other was it necessity is the mother of all invention as well. So in the hard times, it forces change that will help you into the future. So that's definitely positive.
Yeah, and like this, it feels like a good time right now. Like the market is not doing great for many people. I don't know how many people are actually hitting quota. I hope that they are, but this is a good time to actually sit back and assess your process, assess what you're doing. And I just changed a couple of things in my day-to-day, like because I'm a solution specialist, I'm a salesperson now more than an SE. I had to change a few things to figure out like how can I get the sales engineers that do work with me more involved in deals so that we can win more deals. But you mentioned that the interview process that you've seen is like a hiring manager, a couple of SEs, and a panel. I've seen most of the interviews I've been in were completely different, where it's hiring manager, a couple of SEs, a couple of salespeople, VP of sales or a sales director, then the panel interview, and then the VP of sales engineering. You're laughing. I don't know why that. Explain that.
I'm laughing because obviously this is I was providing like the best practice, the current best practice, and then reality comes in and lots of people get involved, and it's.
So you've seen both, right? Like there is the best practice, but you've also like the common practice versus the best practice. So why do you think the best practice is just what you mentioned, sales SE manager, couple of SEs, panel interview? Why do you think that's the best practice, not the other one?
So I think that is the best practice. I don't necessarily think it should be best practice. I think it could be built on a little bit, but I think it's the best practice because at some point they say, right, who's important to be doing the assessment? Obviously, it's a hiring manager, and then you want to have a senior leader come in. It's good to have that contrasted opinion. It's good to bring in people from the team. It can be good to bring in people from the team, also to give them interview experience and hiring experience as well. There's a benefit there.
Yep.
And then the panel stage, suggests to me that that there's the emphasis on the most important thing to do well in this position is to present well, and so that's the job sample we want to see. So Peter Cohen said to me a few years back that he was working with a company and they were having issues hiring and they were making some mishires, and he looked at it, and the recommendation he made was to have a job sample around discovery as well, so to include that in the process because it's a completely different skill set.
Yep.
So they included it as a discovery session as a part of the process, and that really turned things around for that company. So I think that, to your question, why then are so many more people brought in? I think sometimes it's a bit political. You want to get the buy-in from different hire. Like if you're going to make a hire, and you're aware that if it doesn't work, then if everybody said yes, we want to hire this person, then it's a lot more comfortable than if you've made that decision on your own. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So especially on the sales side, because I think I'm generalizing completely, because there are often hiring managers, from my experience, don't trust the assessment of the sales heads as much as they trust the assessment. And actually, the survey results show this as well. I could actually give the exact numbers, but I think there's a political element, and there's just bringing lots of people in. I mean, obviously, more eyes see more, and people have different perspectives, which is great. What I've seen is that I think to confound that further, if you're going to have a bunch of people interview an individual, then rather than everybody asking the same questions and everybody going in broadly, it makes sense to say, if somebody from sales is there, focus broadly, but if you could just also specifically focus around sales acumen, for example, because that's a strength, and we'd love to hear your rating there, and somebody else on the discovery side, and then you've got the panel for the demo. So to try and divide the time up with the candidate in the most effective way possible, I think is one of the recommendations that we've made.
One of the things I do when I interview, and I look for when I'm interviewing other people, is if they're doing a discovery on me for the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Mainly because it is a discovery call. Right? I'm trying to discover as much about the interviewee as they're trying to discover about the company and myself.
Yeah.
So if they can't do a discovery and highlight their strengths in the discovery, where they're the product, how are they going to do it about a product?
100%.
You know yourself more than anything else in the world.
Yeah.
If you can highlight yourself in a positive value. The problem with that is I see sometimes when I've been through interviews where the interviewer doesn't want the interviewee to ask questions until the end.
Right.
And like, all right, fine. I'm happy to wait till the end, but I'm going to have a lot more questions than the last 5 minutes will afford me.
Yeah.
So are you okay setting up another time to continue this chat if things go well?
Yeah. And again, so if you were to be generous, you could say maybe they're replicating how it would be with a customer, or maybe they just like having that structure. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think they had a bunch of questions that they wanted to make sure that they ask, and they didn't take into account that I have my own set of questions that I want to ask.
Yeah.
Which was fine, because after the call, I told them, I'm not done asking you questions. If you're still interested in me, do you mind if we set up another half hour to chat? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I think that was viewed positively.
Yeah. To your point on discovery, so one of the higher side chats we had was with somebody called Malcolm Murphy, and he said that he during the hiring process, he said, "I'm going to let you into a little secret, but don't let anyone know." So when they provide the brief for the panel, he'll purposefully leave that quite light on information, because he's keen to see to what extent they jump on that. They want to set up a call with him. They want to do that discovery. Yep. And then when we have candidates going through interview processes, we always recommend that they try and have that kind of conversation with the hiring manager. And it's really interesting that some don't want to take us up on that, because it feels like a risk, and they go into kind of,
they're worried.
Exactly. It's like, why? Oh, I don't know if I want to take that risk. But you've got to put that in real life. That's a risk you need to take, because the wins of speaking to somebody before the demo and making sure that you're aligned in terms of what you're doing and taking the opportunity to build a relationship and that sort of thing is so big. That some people don't want to take it. And again, that's a good reflection on how it's going to be in reality afterwards. So
if someone offers you a hand, take it. Right?
Exactly.
Because I've actually in real life, when I'm working with customers, I try to find the champion. And if I'm doing a big demo, like a 3-hour demo where we're talking about different solutions and all that, I try to make sure that I have done the demo to the champion ahead of time.
Yeah.
Similarly, in a interview process, If a manager offers their help, take it. If they don't offer their help, ask if they're okay, if they can help, if they can ask them a few questions. It doesn't. They can easily say no, right? If you can't. And the thing that I like about that too is when you jump on a call and you do something, and they give you feedback, it's a good time to show that you're coachable and take their feedback into account while doing the demo. Because I've done this where I coached someone on how to do a demo. Like they did something, they did it wrong. I didn't like it. I told them how they can do to fix it. And then we do the demo in the panel and they do the exact same thing they were doing before. I'm like, they're out. It's not like I'm not expecting them to know everything, but I'm expecting them to try to change a little bit based on my feedback. So yeah.
100%. And I think everything we're talking about here goes back to this idea of trying to simulate real life, because you can ask a competency question around, how do you prepare for a customer demo? And it could be in that competency-based answer, somebody says, I always go out of my way to, try and speak with the key stakeholder, the champion beforehand, and so on.
Yeah.
But someone might say it, but in reality, they may not do it when faced with that kind of the risk return question in their head. And when you see it in reality, then I think it provides that bit more kind of confidence.
One thing about simulating reality versus interviews I've seen is that in reality, if you do a discovery call with a customer, the email after the discovery call is not "thank you for your time, I really appreciate the opportunity." It's more, "This is what we discussed in the call. This is what you're looking for." And why don't we, I do that during interview. After interviews, I send this. And
exactly. You're proven.
Like, hey, this is we made a discovery. This is what you're looking for in an SE. This is how I fit the role perfectly. I'm looking forward to next steps. So.
And also, if you're a hiring manager, the coachability is really important for them to understand. It feels a lot more comfortable when you see that somebody's coachable, that they listen, and that sort of thing. It's hard not to be rooting for that individual where you've had the conversation beforehand and you see them kind of playing it out, and that's the ultimate decision maker. So
yeah, and even if you don't want to take what they give you as feedback, at least have some logic behind why you decided not to do it.
Yeah.
And make sure you mention that during the call, not just ignore altogether. So okay. Did anyone say what was the longest interview process that you've seen in this survey? Or was that even the question that you asked?
No, we didn't. We asked 52 questions, but none of them. So we asked people to rate different types of, but we didn't ask them how long their process was. And we should have actually done that. That would have been a really good question.
Yeah. Because I've been in an interview process that took 3 months, 6 months.
It's bonkers.
Mainly because the way they do it is the recruiter calls you and they say, all right, let's set up a call with the hiring manager. And then they send you an email. What's your availability? They set up an interview with the hiring manager. After that, you get an email from the recruiter saying, the manager loved you. What's the availability for your next person? And then it's just one after another versus even if you want to do 10, just set them all up ahead of time and then cancel if you decide to go another direction. Versus, delaying the. You're giving opportunity for other companies to come and steal your candidates. Basically,
it's a total own goal. It's and the best experiences we've actually had. Well, not the only best, but we've always had a great experience where we're working with a US-based kind of scale-up startup. They're building out their team in EMEA, first hire, second hire, third hire, and the hiring managers might be based out of the US, or some of the hiring team are in the US. And at the beginning of the process, there's a date set. The hiring team will be in London on this date. We've got to work everything towards that date. And so you move all of the candidates along at the same speed. Everyone's aware of what the process will be. It creates the urgency that really helps. And just makes for a super process. So, and we always try to use that as an example and to simulate that, even if there are local hiring teams, because it's the important urgent thing. And obviously everyone's got deals to work on, and getting availabilities is difficult, and making it a priority is difficult, but the benefits are such that it's really worth taking that time to just try and at least plan it out beforehand, and also have candidates moving through at the same pace. Because if not, you might have someone waiting for a week, 2 weeks at the end whilst the others catch up, and you can lose that person. And
not so there are many things that could happen in those 3 months where I've worked with people who were interviewed and were about to get an offer, But because it took 6 months for them to interview, even though there was another job opportunity for them, there was a hiring freeze right at the moment. So the manager couldn't get the person that they wanted.
Yeah.
And there are many reasons to speed up the process: losing your candidates, economical shifts, right? You getting laid off from your job, right?
Yeah.
You never know what can happen. So just speed up.
Hiring freezes.
Yeah, please speed up the process so that it's the same thing. Like, imagine if you're a salesperson and you're just delaying closing a deal.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. The salesperson would never choose to delay.
Yeah. So, but for some reason, when you're hiring people, it's a sales process from both
Exactly.
directions.
Yeah.
I'm trying to close you, you're trying to close me. We both want to close each other. Let's do it. Please, let's hurry up. So,
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And was there, with that 6 month process, did you join that organization?
no,
Okay.
no, I got a job offer from somebody else.
Of course, before
My current company.
Yeah. The question I was going to ask is, was there a correlation between how long the process took and how slow and stodgy internal processes were in general? Because that's the other side. Is from a candidate's perspective, it's you're signaling to them how a company operates as well.
Well, it was a big company. I knew that they weren't 100% convinced that what happened, I started interviewing with them, and a month later I started interviewing with my current company. We kept going through it. The current company, I interviewed with one person and one person only.
Yeah.
Because it was a direct competitor for my previous company. They knew me, they wanted me. So it wasn't a formal interview process, but he was working on closing me as fast as possible. And I kept delaying because I wanted to see both options. You want to, as someone who has options, you want to keep them open as long as possible. And then I did the demo for this panel interview. And by the end of the demo, I walked out, like, I demoed something called X.AI, which is a startup which is now closed. It wasn't successful, but I sold that product. Like, people I was in the meeting room, they wanted to buy that product, which was fun. I knew I did my job. After the call, they say like, "Oh, we should actually go pay for this." So that was great.
So somebody from X.AI is just stabbing the heart now. They go, "Oh."
Yeah, well, I don't know if they actually went out and bought it. I didn't follow up with them to make sure that they buy it or close the deal. But after the demo, I was successful.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, I still haven't heard anything. Like, "Hey, what's going on? We're still interviewing. We should have it." And in the end, I said, "Listen, I have an offer.
Yeah.
I told you I have an offer like 3 weeks ago, and I've been delaying it and playing, hard to get because, well, for reasons. I can't delay it any longer. I need to take care of my family, right? 2 kids. I need to take care of my family. So I took that one. It was just their process is very slow.
Yeah.
It's a big company, and again, decision by committee. It gets the I sometimes take it as a compliment because a lot of companies that I apply to, I don't know the technology. I'm in networking, and everybody else is in IT here in my area. So sometimes they can't make it. They want me, but they don't. They're worried that I don't know the technology, so they end up delaying it, and on something else. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. I went on a ramble for a few minutes now.
Yeah, it's a good anecdote as to and I think the fact that you took the other job first of all is the most important point.
Yeah.
And I think the lesson from all this as well is that I think that the hiring manager, that sometimes recruiting or hiring, the accountability is a bit dispersed. So you've got HR, you've got the recruiting organization, you've got the hiring manager, and I think that a hiring manager needs to ultimately take full accountability. And a part of that is to say, I've got a fantastic HR team, fantastic recruiting team, they can provide loads of guidance and so on. But ultimately, what do I want the process to look like? What's important for me in terms of speed, for example? And if it is speed, to have a little, not a manifesto, that's exaggerating things a little bit, but to have an idea as to what a great process would look like, and then to kind of follow through on that. And I think the speed component, as you highlighted with the example of a salesperson would never slow a deal down, is a big one, and it happens time and time again.
Yeah. What's the fastest process you've seen from your clients?
4 days a week.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
that's it's a bell curve, and that's on one end. That's not normal at all. So there are instances where a candidate's got an offer, for example, and you just need to, and they're great, and you just need to rip them through the process because they're holding off an offer from another company. There are situations where there's been an offer that's been rejected, and that leads to a lot of pain. And so, a candidate comes up who clearly is a good fit, and so there's a lot of appetite to get the role filled. It's normally either there's a level of urgency because of the candidate situation, or there's a high level of pain, which enables everyone to suddenly have availability to interview. But under normal circumstances, I would say 2 to 3 weeks. There are companies that can hire in 2 to 3 weeks.
yeah. I mean,
Time and time again, just as a point of process. And there is a huge difference between companies, and normally it's consistent over different hiring processes. Some companies are just a lot more faster, a lot more dynamic, and others, it's always like pulling teeth. So.
yeah. I mean, if it's a few days, I don't know how they were able to do the panel interview without any preparation. That's one hell of an SE that they hired. So yeah, that's just the thought that popped in my head. Right.
If you have an offer from a company and you definitely want to move, and another company comes in that you think you'd be more interested in them, or at least in seeing the offer, then there's enough incentive there to pull it out of the bag.
Would they skip the demo, the panel interview, or would they do a presentation?
No. I mean, in that instance, no. So that company always have a panel with a business case. So it would have included the panel as well.
So the panel, is that like a demo that the SE has to do?
Yeah, but oftentimes the demo can be demo us your own product, or demo us a product that you've worked with before. So it doesn't necessarily, and that's actually a great way to assess candidates, I think, because you see them at their best. Because sometimes if you're like when you're working for an organization, that becomes there's the point where you understand the product well, and you want to see how the person operates when they understand their product really well, rather than the first or the second or the third demo. Some people might be awful for the first 2 or 3, but then once they get going, really good, for example. And you want to understand how people are once they've got going, because that's normally how they'll be operating at your organization.
Right. Yeah. I don't know which I would prefer better, doing the demo of the hiring the company's product or a separate product. I've done both. When I do the second, like if it's not the company's product, I try to pick a product that I can sell them.
Yeah.
So kind of like X.AI, where in the end of it, I hear that, okay, this is very cool, we actually want to buy it. I feel like I did my job. That's one way to do it. But I also enjoy doing a demo of their own product, because I don't know.
So there's 3 options normally. There's your own product. There is a product of your own choice, and it normally can be something consumery, which is quite good fun to demo, or the company that you're interviewing for. And we will always advise candidates, and this is from a purely like just wanting to help people through the process, always advise to demo their own product, because that's when they'll be seen at their best. Followed by consumer products, because you can create excitement around that. Normally you can do like some kind of productivity app and that sort of thing, where it's easy to grab the interest of the customer. And then the last would be the customer's product. Because so if you're an SE, imagine you get pulled into an interview and they're saying, right, we want you to see the demo of somebody that we might hire, and you see them demoing your own product. Straight away, all of the natural pitfalls that the natural mistakes that individual will make, because they don't know the product inside out, because they haven't gone through that that learning experience of giving demos, understanding where the issues are, and so on and so forth. All of those mistakes will be blaringly obvious to you, if that makes sense. And the individual's not going to be at their most comfortable because they don't know the product inside out. So if they nail it, it's like a high risk version.
Yeah.
So if they can nail it, then obviously that's really impressive, because they've got it right so early. But there's the risk of just making a few blunders that anyone could make during training, and it would be fine. But you're doing it at the interview stage, and so that's why I'm against.
I enjoy doing the customer's product.
Yeah, so you got the challenge of it.
Well, it's because multiple reasons. I don't when I do a demo, especially interview demos, I'm not focusing on the product. I'm focusing on the story.
Yeah.
right? Like whatever I show is irrelevant to what I'm gonna say. Also, I get to ask questions that they know the answers to.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I'm demoing X.AI is an email app. Well, if I'm doing Google Maps, a lot of people for some reason demo
It's good.
Google
That's
Maps.
common. Yeah, it's
And
very
I'm like,
common.
I don't.
Yeah.
What are you demoing with Google Maps? Like how to get from point A to point B? What
So
questions are you going to ask? Right? That will that will involve the audience.
So Google Maps, we've had a guy who was about to get married and he planned his honeymoon, which was a camper van tour around New Zealand. Another who was a Roma football fan who and had just moved to his neighbourhood in London, so he was talking about discovering the neighbourhood. And Roma happened to be playing in Liverpool that week, so planning the journey up to Liverpool. So
Okay.
so I just
So it's
I'm
around
not being
use case. Yeah.
facetious. It's just I laugh because that's actually one that you're right. I've seen that quite a lot.
Yeah.
The Google Maps one.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, not many employees have seen outsiders demo their own products to them.
Yeah.
And they tend to give you, I feel, because they know you don't know the product, they tend to give you a lot more leeway than you're demoing your own product.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And
And also it depends on, so if you said before, for example, that they weren't sure on you because you didn't have the exact hard skills match they were looking for.
yeah,
So if you know going into the panel stage, you're an outsider based on that, you will need to pull off an impressive move. And one of those impressive moves can be, for example, doing
yeah,
the discovery, talking to as many people as possible to ensure you nail it. And then not only nail it, but do it in a different way that opens their own eyes as to how they can sell their own product. Then you can leapfrog completely to the top of the pile.
yeah. And that was one of the benefits of actually delaying the interview process.
Right.
Because I had like 2 months from my last interview to the actual demo. And in those 2 months, I talked to as many people who've used the product as possible. They gave me feedback. They gave me ways to populate data within it that's not just like random data, that's useful.
Yeah.
Watched a lot of YouTube videos, and then I was able to build something. So I had something ready to go before they confirmed the date of the demo. And then the manager said, "Hey, if you want to do a dry run with me beforehand," it's like, "Yes." You don't need to finish that sentence. Yes, tomorrow. And then we did that. I did that a few days before the demo, so I was able to change enough by the time we did the demo. And you know, the one thing that they do is they give you a presentation to do before the demo, and a lot of people try to stick to the presentation. I just changed everything about the presentation.
Love it.
I made it my own. I used the demo flow, aka Gondola, right now. So to show it, and you don't have, like, if they give you a 300-page presentation and you give you 10 minutes, you don't have to do the 300. You don't have to go in order. You can pick and choose, right? What you want and what fits the story. It worked for me. So.
And again, all of this is a sample of reality. So if I was looking at this, I would say, Ramsey is obviously somebody that quite enjoys the challenge of being thrown into a bit of an uncertain situation and having to find ways to wow and doing the work behind the scenes to make sure it happens and being proactive and all that sort of stuff. But those are traits that will carry through into the job as well.
I mean, on the negative side of that, just to make people aware, is that there were technical questions that they were expecting me to know. Like, I focused all my time on building the demo and the story and all that I didn't actually look at learning the product in depth as they might have wanted.
Right.
So they were asking me questions about, like, they expected me to know because it's in their training course, their second training course that I didn't do, and I just didn't know. And my response was, "I'll get back to you on that."
Yeah. Did those questions come from the people from the sales side in the audience?
The SEs.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. So what we've found in the past is that often, and again, going back to the survey, except for very technical positions, because people tend to have good tenures within pre-sales, and there's such a difference between a bad hire, a good performer, and a superstar. Hiring managers will look, so if they have to choose between hit the ground running, know the product already on one side of the spectrum, and then high ceiling of potential but need some ramp up time, they skew a lot towards high ceiling of potential for the ramp up time. And so often they will happily interview people that come from a completely separate solution background, be aware that ramp up's needed, be comfortable with it, but looking at the competencies and the pre-sales abilities.
Yep.
But then we've had some candidates fall at the stage where they have to interview with an AE or a sales director, because the AE goes into the interview thinking, this is going to be my SE. They've got to know the product inside out, right? And we'll just ask loads of questions around the product, and the person actually doesn't have necessarily the product knowledge tippy-toppy. And then there's a red flag from the sales side.
I mean, I don't know how technical salespeople are in different areas, but my experience is they're not that technical. And SEs, if you're jumping on a call, like if you're doing an interview with a company that has a freemium, you should have already been using that freemium before you start the demos.
Yeah.
Before you start the conversations, and you'd be able to answer some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the like I've had some interviews where account managers say like, we love you, but you don't have the technical expertise we're looking for. Like, well, yeah, but I still sold you that stuff, so whatever. You just move on, right? But yeah, some account managers are harder than others. But in the end, if a good SE manager is strong enough, they'd be able to actually do that. I find that a lot of SEs complain about potential SEs not having the technical know-how. For example, we're interviewing a new grad to university from university. He did their master's degree. They had to use Python. A lot of people, the way they use Python specifically is they find code online and they say that's what that's what I need to do. They copy it and paste it. They use Python, but they're not experts. And during the interview, because they had Python on their resume a couple of different times, the senior SE would just dig into Python, and the candidate would say, I just used it for this project. I didn't go in depth. And that's why they got vetoed. And even though I would tell them like, this guy has potential, the SE is the one sometimes that like, oh no, he said they know this and they don't, so they're out. So
I've had that before with a language that wasn't actually important for the position, but it was there as intermediate on the person's CV. And somebody on the panel spoke that language and then asked them a few questions in French it was. And then the integrity was pulled into question. It's tough because I get it. Like you leave intermediate level on your CV for a while, and it's not a huge area, and it drops over time or whatever. I don't know.
I mean, so like if someone flat out lies, you have integrity. But if someone used Python in a project and that's what they have in their resume, and the expectation is because they use Python in a project is to be an expert. Like I have on my resume that I've used Python. And if someone comes and asks me Python questions, I will tell them ahead of time, like, listen, I have limited knowledge of Python. I was able to use it in the project to be successful. And the point of me putting it in the resume is to highlight that I can use things I don't understand to solve problems. But some SEs would listen to that, or some people would listen to that, some people would not. So
this is also a little bit why, so one of the recommendations we've made in the report is just to have as much structure as possible and for everybody to be really focused on the 4 or 5 critical kind of success factors, because if not, people go their own way, and people have got their own different kind of ways of catching someone out, and that must mean this, and just people interview in different ways, and it all becomes a bit random, and you ultimately miss out on really good people for
so I don't know if we missed out on, like, he was a new grad. There were other new grads that we were looking at, but everybody wanted this kid except for that one SE who vetoed them. Because of Python, because of one word on their resume that was used multiple times, but still. John, we're almost at the end of the hour, and I'd love to ask you the 4 questions I ask almost every guest, which is known as the not so fire round. So we might have to do it in fire round succession depending on how much time you have. But let's start with the first one. What do you love about being in the business that you're in, recruiting SEs, working with clients, like big companies to find them the right SEs?
So it's so interesting. So every position that you work on, you talk to a new company and you've got to really quickly understand what their business is, what they do, what's important for them, how their team operates, what's important. You're doing this, it's a type of discovery, I suppose. But there's a hell of a lot of variables to understand. And then you've got to, from there, bring that together into a coherent pitch where you can talk to us, you can talk to an individual who isn't necessarily looking to move and have enough of a story and an argument to really entice them and convince them to talk to the hiring manager of that organization. And that takes quite a lot of time, not time, but it takes it's good fun working that out. You know, what's special about this organization? Why would people go for it? And then from there, going through the hunt is quite exciting. I enjoy it. There's nothing better than when you know, we don't put the phone down anymore, but you would have put the phone down on a super candidate, and you know, suddenly you're rocking and rolling. That feels really good. And also, again, from the candidate side, just really digging in, trying to work out where that person's at, what's important for them, what are their motivators, does it align with the role? Again, and just kind of bringing it all together and then seeing it work is really enjoyable.
I feel like I want to do some role playing with you, a couple different. One, you call in a candidate that doesn't want to leave the current company they're in and try to convince them, and the other one is an interview.
And it's not. I don't think that you can. You know, sometimes you can turn things around and so on. But I think more than anything else, it's looking for alignment in terms of talking to someone. You know, what in the past, what have they really enjoyed about a position? And then seeing, can we offer them that with this position? You know, does it, because there needs to be like a 30% jump in something for people to take the risk to make a move. And so that's got to be there in reality, or if not, it's just going to fall apart at the end. So it's almost more kind of a look at, it's the same as for a software. You're looking for alignment. Yeah.
It sells. I mean, you can sell the best product in the world if it's way over budget. You know, they won't be able to buy it. All right.
Yeah.
Question number 2: what do you consider is your superpower?
My superpower. Oh my god. My superpower.
Beatboxing is not one of them.
Sorry?
Beatboxing is not one of them.
Beatbox is not one of them. I can build good connections with people over time. I think people trust me.
Fair enough.
I need to give that more thought. It's definitely not asking questions around what my superpower is.
But that was pretty good. I was saying about the beatboxing because you were kind of doing just.
I see. Sorry.
It was a very funny joke in my own head, but
yeah,
they're like.
I was immersed in thought of like, shit. What's my superpower?
If like I just asked you about a superpower. If I have a weakness, it's making jokes at the wrong time. All right. Is there a book or resource you'd recommend? You already talked about Peter Cohen and Discovery. So he has a book called Doing Discovery. Any other books you would recommend for aspiring SEs or SEs alike?
I have a lot of time for Don Carmichael. He's somebody who I've listened to lots of his stuff. I've talked to him a lot. I think that he's somebody that has he's very thoughtful, and he's got a clear idea in terms of what's important. And at the same time, he's able to deliver everything in a very light-hearted, kind of fun way. And then another person I've interacted with, Chris White has always really impressed me. He's got a really amazing ability to make everyone. He brings out the best in people, I think, and he's a really smart guy. We actually, I don't know if I can say this. Can we say this and cut this if he's not okay with it?
Sure.
Okay. So we tested the assessment on him, and on the cognitive abilities, he came out off the scale.
Okay, now I need to test.
Really sharp. We didn't even ask him.
Now I need to test. All right. I'm pretty sure I will never be close to Chris. Where can people when will this be out? And when can people use it, or does it have to be for hiring managers only?
So the assessment, people can use it. People can try for sure. There's a test drive option, and that can either be for individuals or for teams. Okay. And it also generates a report. There are candidate reports and hiring manager reports. So anybody can get in touch with me in terms of the this, in terms of Presales Assess, and the reports obviously publicly available as well.
Okay, nice. Can you? I think you sent me the link to the report, so I'll have that in the show notes as well. Last question of the not so fire round, John. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Is there a habit I'm working on to improve my personal or professional life? I am working hard on having perspective and to let go of the flow of things, and to, because it's a tough time at the moment in terms of the market, of I'm working on having the energy, not the energy, having the focus every day to do everything that needs to be done, and then not worry too much about the results.
So you do the boring stuff, basically.
Focus on the process.
Making the calls, writing the
exactly.
emails, not the exciting stuff like closing the deal.
Because it's nice when you're getting the constant dopamine hits of just, there's different milestones and you hit through them, and that kind of keeps you going often. Or that's really motivating and energizing. There are less of those dopamine hits at the moment, so being kind of detached from it all and just happy if you've done the right thing every day.
Okay. Nice. John, we're at the end of the show. Was there any questions you were hoping I was going to ask you that I did not?
No, I think if anybody, I think we've covered. It's been a really nice, free-flowing conversation, and if anybody would like, I would encourage people to have a look at the report. I think that it's definitely the first report of its type within pre-sales. If anybody's interested in looking through the competency model that we've built, that's available as well. But I think that all these things need to kind of hit people's interest. So hopefully there'll be some listeners out there that are interested to learn more.
Sounds good. And if someone wants to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
So our newly designed company website is brightdynamics.co.uk, and I am John Hodgson on LinkedIn.
Nice. Thank you so much for your time, John. I really appreciate this, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ramsey. Always a real pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening. What are your thoughts? What is the longest interview process that you've ever been a part of, and what is the shortest? I'm curious to know, because I've only been in long ones, honestly. And also, how do you know if you hired the right person? How do you know if you didn't hire the right person? We talked about measuring the quality of the hire when you hire someone. How do you measure the quality of the non-hire? Like, was it a good choice? Maybe you should have hired them. How do you know? So these are all topics that rattle around in my brain, and I'm always curious about. So let me know what you think. And if you haven't done so, leave a review for the show. If you are on YouTube, leave a comment. On LinkedIn, whatever, leave a comment. And I will see you next time. With that, I'm signing off.